It's so nice to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I work at Microsoft and run an emerging business group here and oversee what we do in Silicon Valley. I am so pleased to welcome you all here to the Churchill Club's 11th annual Top 10 Tech Trends Debate. Get it out. And this is a real thrill for me. I've, like most of you in the audience, been a fan and a friend of the Churchill Club for a long time and recently got involved with the board. And as the chair-elect and incoming chair, I have the honor tonight to bring our panelists up to the stage and to thank all of you for your participation. This is one of the highlight events in my mind for the Silicon Valley community. We bring together some of the brightest minds in venture capital, some of the most interesting people in the community who come here, all of you. And tonight I'd like to now take a moment and bring together our distinguished prognosticators up to the stage. So if I may, they should be coming soon. Vinod Khosla. I will say founder of Khosla Ventures, but his resume goes far beyond that, and it's really left unsaid because it's so prominent. Steve Jurvetson. Managing Director at Draper Fisher Jurvetson. Ann Winblad. Most of you know Ann is co-founder of the Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. Ram Shriram. Ram is founder of Sherpalo Ventures, but noted for many other things other than that, not the least of which is being one of the earliest investors in Google and currently on their board. And finally, last but not least, all of our favorites for this panel, Joe Schoendorf. Joe's a venture partner at Accel Partners and is never one to be lost for words. And as Karen already mentioned, we couldn't be more fortunate to have Jason Pontin here tonight, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of Technology Review. Jason,
one for everybody.
Certainly no stranger to this stage and his background with editor at Red Herring and all the things that he's brought to the table, in particular helping with the program tonight. We want to thank you, Jason. And last but by no means least, Tony Perkins, co-founder of the Churchill Club, Editor-in-Chief of AlwaysOn, founder and Editor-in-Chief of Red Herring. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. All right. Well, here we are. Jason, I'm glad that Karen gave you some extra credit tonight for helping on the program because as you well know, for all those years you were editor of the Red Herring, I got all the credit.
You did, Tony. Well, I did all the work.
And you did all the work. I remember driving down 101 looking up at our headquarters with the lights on and your floor, and you guys would be there so late at night.
Every night.
And I'd be coming home from dinner, enjoying myself. Speaking of Red Herring, we have some, our alumni showed up tonight. We got Rafe Needleman is here, Blaze
Zariga, who is
Andy Ryans, June Sargent. If you worked at Red Herring, raise your hand. All right. that was the real Red Herring. Okay, and we got a great group of guests. I think, Jason, we discovered Steve Jurvetson, didn't we?
We did discover Steve Jurvetson. And Tony, what did we call Jervy back in, I don't know, 1996 or something?
Yeah, we said he was the John Doerr of the new millennium.
And there he sits.
Hey, that was a good trend that we were right about. In fact, he has replaced John Doerr, who, as I understand it, is too scared to show up.
Now, Tony, let's behave.
And then we got Uncle Joe. And he was, of course, investing when we were, gosh, children.
Funded the cotton gin.
And then we're always happy to have Ann, the lovely Ann Winblad, who was always forthcoming and good to us at Red Herring. And as long as she's at least has someone between her and Joe. We won't have to call the police. And then who else? Well, Vinod is such an icon that we can't tease him. But he came to the Churchill Club probably 20 years ago when I begged you to do it, and I think you were the CEO of Sun at the time, so it's always good to have you here. And then we have Ram, also known as the one-hit wonder.
Oh, boy.
Sorry,
But
Ram.
Tony, it was such a hit. It was such a hit.
We could have that hit.
Okay, so what do we...
So we have to explain how the voting works.
He obviously doesn't know.
Who knows how the voting works in the audience? You all do? Good. Tony, just for those who don't know, explain the red paddle, green paddle thing.
Okay. One difference after 12 years is I have to wear my glasses now. Let's see. Okay. So, as I understand it, we all have red and green cards on our table. Is that true? And so, essentially, red means that you don't agree with the trend. Green means that you agree with the trend. So we're into, as Jason will articulate later, into what do we call that? Wisdom of the crowd. So your participation is very important. Of course, our panelists, including Jason and myself, have these little paddles, and so when we like something, we go green, and then as well as the other panelists, and then red means that we don't like it, and if you think it's kind of mediocre, you go like this. Okay?
So, let me explain how the trends are going to work tonight. It's a little bit different from the way we normally do it. Each one of the panelists has one trend, which they get to propose, and we get to vote on as well. But we also decided that this year we're going to open the trends to the wisdom of the crowds. And we've selected 5 trends based upon venture funding, number of deals, intellectual property raised, and crucially, numbers of mentions in the press. I want to emphasize that neither Tony nor I endorse these trends, but they are what the crowd thinks is wise. I know most of these folks think they're kind of good and bad. And then finally, if we have time, the 2 journalists, Tony and I, have 2 bonus trends, which we're going to...
Which we actually believe in.
Which we actually believe in.
Right. Thanks, Joe. Okay, I think as I'm looking at the program here, and we're supposed to run through last year's trends real quick.
Yeah.
So if we could put up the first one, this is embarrassing because I think I had 2 of them. So we're going to test out how well we can vote here. The first trend, if we can put it up, was by the illustrious Steve Jurvetson, and it says, demographics are destiny creating opportunity. Every 11 seconds, a baby boomer turns 60. The internet-savvy cohort represents an enormous market of time and money, driving new opportunities in mental exercise, online education, and eventually an eBay for information that exceeds the market for physical goods. So how many believe in that? I don't understand it.
I don't understand it, Steve.
All right. That was the first one. Okay, number 2 was Vinod, and it says the device that used to be the phone. A mobile phone will turn into a mainstream computer. Beyond email, built-in projection screen, and high-speed data will make it your virtual credit card, ID, passport, access to new types of presents, IM, payment system, personal information filing system, and much, much more. So I'm a iPhone dude.
Yeah.
Visionary.
Sea of green.
You have green, Vinod.
Okay. Number 3, the rise of the implicit internet. This was Josh Koppelman, who didn't get invited back this year. He was young and elbowed out by Joe. But historically, the web delivered most of us value by satisfying explicit user actions. A user entered a search query on Google, a user entered a review on Yelp, a user added his or her friends on Facebook. The rise of the implicit internet. Do we like that? I think he is... Yes. Okay. Number 4, which is Roger McNamee, who said he couldn't make it because John Doerr wouldn't make it. So we admire that. The mobile device industry's migration from feature phones to smartphones will produce even greater disruption than what the other PC industry experienced as it moved from character mode to graphical interfaces. It will disrupt the competitive balance with big market share shifts. Consumers will benefit from greater choice and lower prices. Well, I think both the mobile deals were good and continue to be good. Number 5, Joe Schoendorf, water tech will replace global warming as a global priority. Let's all raise our glass of water to Joe. The world is running out of usable water, and this will kill millions more people in our lifetime than global warming. So I'm a believer in focusing on water myself. Jason's not.
Well, not this next
You
year.
eat drink that dirty East Coast water. Evolution trumps design. This is Steve Jurvetson. Many interesting unsolved problems in computer science, nanotechnology, and synthetic biology require the construction of complex systems. Evolutionary algorithms are a powerful alternative to traditional design, blossoming first in neural networks, now in microbial re-engineering, blah, 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 and eventually artificial intelligence. Oh, that winner. Slam dunks. Jervy, dude. Okay, moving on to plain English. Fossilizing fossil energy, Vinod Khosla. Oil will have increasing difficulty competing with biofuels made from cheap non-food crops for transportation. Coal will become less competitive compared to reliable solar, thermal, and enhanced geothermal electricity, as both oil and coal's decline will be aided by higher efficiency engines, cars, lighting, appliances. Steve, what do you think about that? Okay. Vinod, do you agree with yourself?
Yes, I agree with myself.
Okay, good. All right. Now, this one I thought was good for Josh, the young man. Venture Capital 2.0. Venture capital has underwritten most of the transformative software and internet companies for the last 20 years. However, changing economics for both startups and venture funds, combined with changing markets, will have a dramatic impact on the venture capital industry. That's pretty good. It's been a tough year, right? Go, Josh.
Yeah.
You're here in spirit. 9, Roger McNamee. Within 5 years, everything that matters to you will be available on a device, preferably Palm, because I gave it millions of dollars. No. iPhone, no, just kidding. That fits on your belt, or in the case of Roger, he has several phones on his belt. I think you called him a medieval knight at one time, Jason. That this will cause a massive shift in internal traffic from PCs to smaller devices. So I think mobile was definitely foreseen. Finally, number 10 was Joe again. 80% of the world population will carry mobile internet devices within 5 to 10 years. Mobile internet devices are rapidly becoming the leading product category. So I think, you know, what's interesting is there's twice as many mobile users as internet users. So there's a morphing effect that will do well. Okay, with that, maybe we'll start with the trends for this year.
Karen, however, has asked me to read a quotation from the great and late Peter Drucker. I never predict. I just look out the window to see what is visible, but not yet seen. So with that, we are going to ask Joe to tell us what he has seen with the millennials.
I asked for an extra minute or two, and first of all, thank you guys for doing this. This is always the most fun night I have every year. And this is, what, year 10, year 11, year 10 for me. So thank you, everybody at the Churchill Club, and thank you all for being here. This is a kind of interesting month in the history of Silicon Valley. Today is Craig Barrett's last day as chairman of Intel. He retires. He's going up to Triple Creek to his ranch and go do other things. That's important because he started at Intel And I got to thinking about this. We were talking, he started at Intel in 1974. For those of you that weren't here then, I promise you it was a lot worse then than it is now. And let me be very specific. He was a material science professor at Stanford when Andy called him and said, I've got a new idea and I'm working on it and I need a lot of help. Intel had just quit the RAM business. And it was a shockwave because they'd gotten out of a business that was deemed to be very important. And we were losing to the Japanese and the Koreans, and we just couldn't compete. The Palo Alto Times, which was sort of the precursor to the San Jose Mercury, ran a headline that said, Intel out, is Silicon Valley the next Detroit? Andy, of course, hired Craig because he said material science is going to be important. We're going to invent integrated circuits, and here's what we're going to do with them. And you've seen what Intel has created over the last 35 years. I said it was worse because what was interest rates then? Double digit, 15% probably for the prime. Inflation was double digits. The stock market had come down more than 50% off its peak in 1969. And when we got to the bottom, just to set a tone, wasn't for about 3 more years. And the bottom was kind of marked when the magazines, Time magazine said, they had a black cover, and they said the death of stocks. The Dow was at 700, and the backward PDE was 7 or 8 for the Dow 30. And then Business Week, not to be outdone, did another black cover 2 weeks later that said, one said the death of stocks and the other said the end of equities. And at that point, the Dow started a march from 700 up to the 14,000 it got to here. So we need another cover like that from one of your magazines, Tony, that says the end is here so we can keep going. Now, this is a special month for another reason because I actually think it's going to mark a major turning point in the Valley and in what the Valley does. And here's what I'm going to say. This month, graduation started in colleges like it always does in May. What's unique about this graduation is it's the first time in history that the graduating class, most of whom are 21 and who were born in '88, cannot remember being alive and not being online. Everybody in this room, and if there's somebody in 25 in here I don't mean to offend, we can all remember what it was like not to be online. The behavior of that single fact is going to begin to change everything that we do. It's going to begin to change who we employ, how we employ them, how we compete with them, and most importantly, how we sell to them. Eric Schmidt gave a speech at the University of Pennsylvania and at Carnegie Mellon this weekend. He did too. And I read, as I was preparing for this, I read one of the things he said. And he said, let me compare the generations, most of which are in this room, to the generation that he was talking to, the graduates. We had phone booths. You had mobile phones. We had Tang. You drink Red Bull. We had computer games. We played Pong. You have Wii. I started looking at some numbers about the kind of impact this generation is having on the internet, and I looked at one statistic, YouTube traffic on a monthly basis. Remember when we had the boom in 2000, Tony, and we were talking about how big the internet was going to be?
Yes.
On a monthly basis right now, YouTube is bigger than the entire global internet was in 2000. There's no point now at which YouTube doesn't pass on a monthly basis the best month the internet had just 9 years ago. And YouTube is driven still primarily by one age generation. And then I started curious and I said, okay, what's the world population like and how young is it really? And so I went to Wolfram Alpha. How many of you have used Wolfram yet? Kind of cool, isn't it? So Sunday morning or Saturday when it came up, I typed in world population by age. And the first thing I did is I got the US population and I found out the median is 37 years old. I said, that's too old. That's not going to make my point. So then I typed in world population, and I got world population median age 26 years old.
Wow.
Big difference. So half the world is under 26. And then I made a few calls and I said, okay, what's Facebook's median user? Because they're now what, 200 million
300,
users?
300.
300
So they're
million
bigger than
users, number
YouTube.
one on the web, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of our companies, and I'm not here to promote it, but median age, 26 years, same as the global population. But 3 years ago, it was 20, because you had to be in college in order to use it. So how these people behave and what they buy is going to be as profound as any of the technologies that we talk about tonight. I told this story last year, but I want to repeat it because it makes my point. I've got a daughter who is one of these people. She's 21, she's at Princeton, she's an electrical engineer. When Facebook first started, we weren't allowed to be on it. You had to be a college kid. We were at Thanksgiving at our house. You know, my older daughter decided that Thanksgiving was not worth having if she couldn't be disruptive and start picking on the younger one. So she busted the younger one by showing us her Facebook page. Now, I had never seen the Facebook page of my daughter because I wasn't allowed to be on Facebook at the time.
You never seen your daughter in lingerie either.
And I didn't, oh. Now, there were no pictures on there that all of you don't have if somebody had kept pictures of us when we were in college. Except as a dad, I didn't like it. And so the next day, we were down at the beach at Big Sur, and I took her down to the beach, and I said, Megan, you're a smart kid. You're double E, you're at Princeton, you're learning to speak Mandarin. You know, 10 years from now, these pictures are going to come back to haunt you. She said, Dad, you don't get it. I said, Megan, I've known you for 18 years, and I haven't gotten it yet. What is it I don't get now? And she said to me, and she looked me in the eye, and she said, Dad, I'm not going to work for anybody like you. All of my friends are going to have been on Facebook, and the people I work with and the people I work for. And that's how they think about privacy. And I could sit here if I had 10 more minutes and talk about trends, but the winners are going to be the people that take the technologies that we talk about tonight and adapt it to that generation, which now represents half the world. End of speech.
All right. Vote time.
Vote.
Okay, so we typically start with the panel. You want to give it a red or a green or a purple? Okay. Well, Steve, you're under 26.
Tell us what it's like.
So I have no question that this group of young people will drive the greatest wave of disruption ever witnessed. That last sentence is correct, but it's completely misplaced causality. They're not important, nor are they different because of internet usage. That statement is going to be true for all young people, and it always has and always will be. They drive all meaningful change. They invent new things. They lead political revolutions. It's not because of their internet upbringing that they're going to lead the revolutions of the future. And in fact, their internet usage isn't that different than the cohort just a few years ahead of them. And so what I would take issue with this is one of what conclusion do you take from it, other than we need more exclamation points and everything's changing. That's because as you go on, because of the accelerating pace of technological change, each of these disruptions is greater, right? So 20 years from now, the disruption led by young people then will be more disruptive than the one today, and the parents of those kids will be just as proud as the ones today. And it's that pattern that's more important, right? The technology change accelerates disruption, and that young people lead all meaningful change. The Apples, Googles, Hewlett-Packards, the companies that have lasting value, Microsoft, Dell, every company you care about was started by someone in their 20s or teens. And that's going to continue to be the case, and will always be the case. So I think it's just misplaced causality.
Anne liked the trend, though.
Yeah, I think that every once in a while we do a step function here where things change. And when we get to my trend, I'll talk about what impact this has on the computing model already, not just because of this generation, but because the enhancement by this generation. I think when you see what we look at venture capitalists is what's sort of swimming under the surface. And there seems to be several things that come together. And this age group has come upon time in the computing model where they don't think of it as a computer anymore. Joe is very, very right here in sort of the naturalness and the economy of technology that they experience. I started a company in 1975. I had to pay $30,000 to buy one computer. that had 256K of memory. There weren't a lot of other 23-year-olds out there that were crying at the bank saying, will you lend me $30,000? It was just too hard. So much friction has been taken out of the compute model. And it's not about age, it's just the timing of when you happen to enter the technology cycle. And the timing for this generation is probably more interesting than not. I'll talk more about this during my trend, but I do think that it may be what Steve is saying, that it's just because you were born in a certain year that the millenniums are going to change it all, but the millenniums are the lucky ones. They really, the ingredients that the way they experience technology, you know, and the impact that they have even on their parents to say, this is not this hard, why don't you try it? You know, you too could be on Facebook. How many reluctant parents are now on Facebook driven by that 18-year-old daughter? So I think Joe is correct, and that's why I supported it, that this particular age group and this particular moment in time is a really important period and will be a very big driver of change.
I mean, I think the real key question here is there a distinct generational break in behavior? And I agree with Joe in the respect that you had the PC generation, which, you know, appeared to me as, you know, when Steve Jobs and company were saying, we're going to put a computer on everybody's desk.
It seemed pretty cool at the
everybody thought that was like insane, right? And that was a generational break that created a lot of disruption, right? And then, so the real question, I mean, Vinod, did you vote red?
Vinod hated it as well.
Yeah,
I voted red.
You were in red, and why as a
So,
father of millennial
my
kids?
reasoning was almost identical to Steve's and went beyond it. I do believe this generation has a different mindset, and the next generation will have an even more different mindset. The rate of technology change is accelerating, and that will enable more capability, and a new generation will always adapt to it faster. I remember in the late 80s, I was talking to Bob Pittman, who is the founder of MTV, and he showed me an amazing chart. The number of people who had multiple channels in the home when growing up almost coincided almost exactly with the number of people who actually subscribed to pay TV. Right? So that this notion that people's habits get formed early in their years, and you'd have to really see the chart to understand what I'm trying to explain. There's not enough time. Every generation gets used to certain things, and after the age of 35 or 40, you sort of get locked in your ways. Newspaper readership above and below the age of 40 is dramatically different. And so I think this is a characteristic of every generation and how fast technology makes new tools available, and each generation will be more surprising than the previous one. But the reason I want to go beyond that is my view is this is sort of a narrow slice of life. There's a much broader slice. It's a slice of life. How do international communities work? How does energy work? How do we build communities and cities and towns, and how do we use energy? There's massive disruption coming in a lot of different areas, in my worldview, mostly enabled by technology. And so I think the change is much broader, and it's not just constrained to this particular generation. It's just one data point in time that feels surprising only because we didn't have it.
And Ram, how did you vote?
I voted yes, and while I agree there's disruption going on in other markets and other segments, I do think that this is a discontinuity that's fairly significant in that, let me give you a couple of examples. In the morning when I wake up, you know, our generation used to read newspapers instead of read them on the internet, or, you know, they were reading physical newspapers. I get clippings of the news service read on the iPhone by my daughter, and these are little links saying, you just need to read these 4 stories in the New York Times today. And then my younger child, who's 3 years younger than her, is editing a story, you know, a book on her iPhone. I couldn't even use the iPhone to read my email, let alone edit a book. So I think yes, I understand the causality point, but this is such a change that I think it's going to enable a whole new set of applications we've never seen before. Whether people get to make money on it or not is different. I just think that this is a huge change in the way people are using technology, and one generation that's using it is using it completely different from this next generation. And perhaps some in their 30s are aspiring to use it the way that our kids are using it, but those of us that are in our 50s are not even close.
Yeah, let me ask a closing question here before we open up the vote to our audience. But as venture capitalists, I guess it'd be focused more on consumer-related products and services. Do you, Ann or Steve or any of you, are you prejudiced towards 20-somethings when they come into your office? And
Absolutely.
do you feel more prejudiced towards younger?
You mean when Zuckerberg at 19 walked into our office and said, I have an idea for this social network,
Right.
Did we like it? Yeah.
So I guess the question is that, I know Vinod started Sun when he was 27, but, I think I've seen kind of a shift where you kind of feel like either they're part of that world or they're not, and I wouldn't be backing a 35-year-old, doing a new Web 3.0. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that perhaps one other thing is happening is that there are some people that are being left behind, and we are prejudiced there.
Right.
Where they're not fully equipped to understand the full set of tooling that they have at their disposal to fully evolve any kind of compute model. And that happens rarely. It seemed like it happened in that early 70s period where there was a whole bunch of people that didn't kind of move forward. They didn't sort of get the message that things were shifting really rapidly. And Vinod talked about a continuously accelerating pace. But I do think there is a step function here where the prejudice is not so much for the 19-year-old, but against the left behind.
Right.
I mean, it's true in science as well. You move from pattern synthesis to pattern recognition, right? We're all in the careers we're in trying to recognize patterns, not create the future directly. And the young people tend to create the future. They create the patterns we recognize.
Shall we see what the audience thinks?
If
No
you
audience.
agree with Joe, it's green, and no is red.
I think that's a preponderance of green, Tony.
Yes, very much so.
Very much so.
All right.
Before we... So, Joe. Yes.
This made Uncle Joe very happy.
Before we do the second trend, can I ask if any of the millennially minded are twittering, you little freaks, if you'll please use #CHC, and then Karen can maximize her social graph. So, seriously.
Yeah,
So
if you don't understand what he just said, you've been officially left behind.
If you don't know what I meant, you're not going to get funded by any of these people.
Yes, yes.
So if we bring up the first crowdsourced trend, this says advanced batteries will be the most popular alternative energy investment in 09 and 10, and in the medium term will provide the best returns amongst all alternative energies. And the justification for this is that while venture funding for clean energy tech mainly fell throughout 09, investment in companies creating alternative batteries actually increased to 69 million in the first quarter, over 50 million the previous year, based largely upon one company, A123 Systems out of MIT, funded by Deshpande, which has received more than $1 billion in venture funding to date. But crucially, the Obama administration has assigned $2 billion in stimulus money to go and force the creation of new batteries. The press loved this trend. The phrase advanced batteries was mentioned 376 times this year compared to around a little over 100 the previous year. So the reason why these batteries matter, just very quickly, is that without better storage, not only can we not do things like electric cars, alternative energy sources like solar are less efficient. So this is what the world thought was important in alternative energy so far this year and at the end of last year. Shall we vote?
Does our panel find it important? I know it's hot, but are we just fanning ourselves?
Wavering minds.
Okay, Vinod, you're a green dude. What do you think?
Well, batteries are clearly important, but no question they're a very important enabler of a lot of things. And most people don't realize they're probably a more important technology for wind and solar than wind and solar are for wind and solar.
Yeah.
And the reason is simple. Today, if you're producing wind and solar power, you're saying to a large utility, I'll sign up a 20-year contract and ship you power when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining. That's not exactly comforting to a utility where the governor calls if you don't have enough capacity. And so batteries are the solution to that. Now, I use batteries generically. They could be mechanical, they could be electrical, they could be electrochemistry, could be any one of those things. And that set of batteries is very different than batteries for your car, for example, where mobility is important. So it is fashionable, it is important, we'll see a lot of activity. There's a lot of different battery segments. I'm not smart enough to, I sort of read it fairly technically and said the most popular alternative energy. I don't know if I'd describe it as the most popular, but it's clearly one of the important trends. And again, too many different markets to go address. Even among grid storage, there's 3 entirely different markets. One is for when a big load like your ski lift comes on and off, there's huge surges. Grid stabilization is a very different market than storing wind power at night and delivering it during the day when there's peak load. So those are entirely different markets with very different characteristics. And so sort of a nuanced answer. That's why I was wavering a little bit. But I do think it's a very important category. I would also add most traditional views of batteries will change.
Yeah.
If I were to guess 10 years from now, I would guess pretty unlikely lithium-ion batteries will be important, which is contrary to almost everything you hear from everybody else. What is the alternative? I don't yet know, but you're starting to see enough sparks of innovation that we will see new ideas. You could see completely, for grid batteries, it's entirely something else called flow cells, most likely, but in fact, even there's so many creative ideas floating around that have nothing to do with electrochemistry that if you call them batteries because they store energy, yeah, you can call them batteries, but they may be electromechanical systems.
Maybe one more comment by Steve?
Well, sure. I think I agree exactly what Vinod said, but maybe taking it a little further beyond just wind and solar. He meant to also say the smart grid. To realize the potential of that, you're going to need distributed storage. And so, as you mentioned, the market segment's very different. The needs are different, and I think the pace of innovation in the storage devices is, in some cases, leading to all kinds of new markets and opportunities that otherwise couldn't exist for renewables and for the smart grid. It's also, of course, in all of our devices. The aggregate waste or usage of all the aggregate devices on the planet is starting to add up to a staggering number. So you take the millennial trend and some others around mobility, people are going to be carrying these devices with them all over the place. I mean, I drove here in a car that has 6,831 lithium-ion cells. And as more and more vehicles move in that direction, it's going to be an enormous market. And we're going to need to get off lithium as a raw material as well.
Joe was shaking his head aggressively about this trend. Not aggressively, sternly.
I made my paddle in the middle red and green because I think there's 2 legitimate sides to this. Here's what I know that I'm certain of, and that is that in 10 years, if you live in a major metropolitan area, the overwhelming majority of us will commute in electric cars. And so that's going to happen. That will be the mode for intra-city, within the city, going to work 30 miles a day. Now, that's going to be battery driven. Is that a venture play? Probably not. Why not? Because we do things that are disruptive. And if you look at the 30 or 40 year curve of batteries, it's been the opposite of Moore's law. It's been a single-digit % increase, per long unit period of time. And it's probably a big capital play outside of the realm of what limiteds give us money to do. So batteries will happen. There will be new forms of batteries. I worry about lithium ion only for one reason. One of the reasons we want electric cars is greenhouse. The other reason we want electric cars to get away from Middle East oil. Well, where does half the lithium in the world come from? Bolivia. So switching from Middle East oil to another country where we don't have control of the prime material may not be the best idea. Gonna happen, maybe not a big venture play.
Should we have the audience vote? Unless Ram or Anne have a strong opinion on batteries? They do not. Does the audience believe that alternative batteries are going to be a hot area for venture? Well, not for venture, for general investment. I don't think it actually specifies venture.
Yeah, it did.
As an investment generally. It's kind of even Stevens.
Like the group.
So Jason, let me add one more comment in
Yes.
response to Joe's end comment, and that doesn't change anybody's vote. The one thing I would disagree with is his contention that most of us will drive in electric cars. That is extremely unlikely. And I did a quick analysis. The Honda Civic Hybrid was just introduced in India, not an expensive car, middle of the road hybrid car. And the Tata Nano has just been introduced. And my analysis showed that the total passenger miles driven in the Honda Hybrid would be a fraction of 1% compared to the Tata Nano passenger miles. So most of the passenger miles in this world will be driven in cars that are inexpensive. And unless we see a black swan of battery technology is unlikely to power the world's. We will ship 1 billion cars on this planet in the next 15 years. It is very unlikely that we will ship more than 10% of those as electric cars.
But this is why you believe so profoundly that we have to have a series of novel biofuels which will work with the existing structures.
Well, I believe profoundly, and I'll get to this when I get to my trend. Fundamentally, whatever we do has to make economic sense. And if it doesn't make economic sense, it's not going to be pervasive. 5% of Californians will do anything. I drive a hybrid, so we own 5 hybrids in our family. But that's not the point. What middle to upper income Germans or San Franciscans can afford is not where the action's at. It's where you'll ship 1 million cars compared to a Prius in the first 6 months. And that's the Tata Nano.
The reason I said what I did is over the last 3 months, and I think this is important, I went and talked to the CEOs of the big car companies. And with they saw Obama's 35-mile coming. They can't make internal combustion engines work and have a fleet average that does that without a huge mix of electric cars in the big cities. And so they're
And when have the
planning
big
to
companies
ramp
been
up.
able to predict any innovation? I was talking earlier this year to Rick Wagner at GM.
Who?
Rick Wagner,
Who?
CEO of GM. Who is right?
He's now a venture partner of Vinod's.
I said a 50% improvement in the internal combustion engine is likely, and 100% improvement is possible in the next 3 to 5 years. And he said our engineers think that's pretty close to impossible. 5% is possible, not 50, and definitely not 100. More than one entrepreneur, maybe 100 entrepreneurs, are working on 50 to 100% improvement. And if one of them succeeds, it completely changes the picture. And that is extremely likely. A hybrid, by the way, gives you about a 25% improvement in mileage, not 50 or 100%. So innovation died in these areas about 25, 30 years ago and just started reviving in the last year or two. And that's why everything's up for grabs. We're even looking at multi-module engines where couple of modules are fuels and a couple of modules are electric. Just like you have 8 cylinders, think of some of the cylinders being electrical and some being biofuels or other fuels. So all kinds of things are possible. In fact, a hydraulic hybrid give you a far greater efficiency improvement than an electric hybrid. Easily get 100% improvement by just changing the transmission to a hydraulic transmission, which has energy storage capability. So I could go on and on. There's lots of innovation to be had.
But
Can
you should
I
not,
I want the last word here a minute.
No, no, no.
I don't know how to make money, but I'll tell you how to lose money. You lose money by betting against Vinod.
That's
But in
true.
this case, I disagree with you. So
And we have 7 more trends to go to. So I am going to obey my hostess and encourage Anne to give us trend number 3.
So I guess is it up on the screen? Okay. Joe talked earlier about the millenniums, and certainly this is the only compute model that they know. If we look at what's happening and the velocity of this, let alone the quantity of data, the computing environment is becoming more and more distributed. It's faster, it's more accessible, it's more virtual, and data not only increases in amount, but it's also more crunchable by more users. We've introduced in the last year the elastic compute model, concepts like cloud bursting, raw computing power is accessible and cheap. Storage is free. A virtual machine is 10 cents an hour now. And that is the new reality of this compute model. So what it means is that for the enterprise, all the dark matter is occurring at the unstructured data interaction, whether that's one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one. And it also means it brings in all sorts of new issues in the compute model, which for us as investors means new opportunity. Whose data is it being fought by a number of companies today? Is it yours? Is it mine? Is it ours? What does privacy mean in the unstructured data environment? What does security mean? To my knowledge, there's not one established company that even knows how to categorize unstructured data at a great leverage. A year ago, we thought that you should blog. I think someone declared today that blogging is dead. This is all real time. It's not sort of a pile of data that comes in a batch. It is increasing velocity. One analyst referred to it as the dark matter of the enterprise. And some of this is obvious. A lot of companies aren't standing still. I noticed quietly about 2 weeks ago, IBM announced a new 4,000-unit services group called the Business Analytics and Optimization Group to only work on unstructured data. Probably the first services firm to actually form an entire business unit focused on this opportunity. And this trend is not going to stop. What it means for the existing compute model, what is occurring at the unstructured level is not even connected today to the back-end plant that we've built over the last 30 years since that seminal time in 1974. If you look at even common computing components, the application server, not meant to deal with this. The relational database, not meant to really deal with this. So for us as investors in the software environment, we see this disruptive trend as really reshaping the computing industry itself and creating huge opportunities for the creation of new companies.
Put it up for our vote of our panel here. Okay, Steve.
Well, okay.
What do you have to say?
I'll try to be brief.
Slow it down.
Okay.
Come down to our level, Steve.
No, I think this one's easy in my mind, in that to be a top 10 trend, it has to, at least in my mind, be a scintilla of something new. And so, no offense, but this trend has been repeated 1,000 times over the last 17 years. It was first promulgated by IBM 17 years ago, then stated by Oracle in 1996, then written up exactly as worded in a Merrill Lynch report in 1998. That was picked up by Gartner, Yankee Group, IDC, and every other research group. Gartner stated again in 1995. it hasn't really changed for over 17 years. And so it may still be true. And I think there are opportunities, as there were, but Oracle's been aware of it for over a decade, and it's been stated as a trend for over a decade. And that sort of disqualifies it in my mind. That being said, we have companies like H5 and others that are going all over this and taking advantage of it and finding that, yes, it is true. 80% of the data in the enterprise is unstructured. It's true that's in consumer internet and in just about every context you can look for, and that's where the business opportunities lie.
Vinod.
So I agreed with Ann for a very specific reason. I agree with Steve that this has been around and discussed for a long time. Yeah, but I disagree with your assumption that just because IBM's been thinking about it, there are no 19-year-olds in IBM,
I wasn't saying that.
right? So it will be a different approach from a younger generation. Let's focus on a simple user need. Today, you think of a website and you go to the website. That pyramid needs to be inverted. Google was an attempt at inverting that where you search for what you need. I contend that there's a massive opportunity, and it'll most likely be based on unstructured data, which is things find you and your proxy in the network. Based on unstructured data and your behavior, decides what gets to you. So it's almost like every one of us will have personal assistants in the network, virtual personal assistants, that sort of sort, filter, select based on behavior and unstructured data and relationships and friends and Facebook networks and all that stuff to come to you. Now that's unlikely to come from IBM. It is unlikely to come from somebody who's thinking about it in a very structured way. It'll be a new computer science PhD project someplace, another Larry and Sergey. So I actually think there's a lot of information to be had, and more importantly, a lot of value to be had, because the next big thing all of us need is data reduction. The amount of data we get is exploding, in some new approach to reducing that information flow to just what we want. And that's going to be based most likely on something like what Ann talked about, probably in some unsurprising way.
So Jungali was an experiment in unstructured data, because back in 97, 98, what we were really doing was trying to mine unstructured data for information about prices of, at that time, the beginnings of e-commerce on the internet, for DVDs, for books and music, and so forth. And it was a hard problem. It continues to be a hard problem. And the level of preciseness in terms of the results you get if you engage a personal agent or whatever on the internet to go find the data that you want for you, needs to get much, much better for it to be a better user experience. So the challenge is going to be, will there eventually be a team that comes in with a product or a solution that really works for consumers and the user experience around it is really great? Then I think you will have a huge success. But there is no question that this is a big opportunity. It's much bigger than the opportunity with structured data, clearly. And data reduction, Vinod is absolutely right, is a big theme, because we all suffer from too much data.
And Ram, look, Google targeting advertising at you is an application of unstructured data. They have reduced the vast universe of potential advertising they can throw at you and selected it down to the ones that might be interesting. That's just the first baby step in where we will go.
Right.
Yeah, I think if you really, when Steve looks backwards at these trends, I mean, what people were counting is things like email. They were just counting the bits. They weren't evolving the compute model at all. Even if I look at one of our companies, Omniture, which is a very successful public company, effectively, if I'm looking at the Walmart user site, it's quite possible, because of them running real-time A/B analysis, that the Walmart site I'm looking at is different than the one Steve's looking at. And in real time,
it will be.
It already is. And so the integration of really breakthrough mathematics, you know, even social algorithms here, we're really just at the start of that. And that was never even conceived of when those Merrill Lynch reports were written.
Joe has a remark. He promises me it will take 10 seconds.
Well, I think Steve was a little bit unfair. I think we could take every trend up here today, and we could find somebody with Steve's IQ who thought of it 10 years ago.
Turned on you.
So all these ideas have been around at some level. What's going to drive this now and why we're getting to the knee of the curve is because of the rate at which places to store this data are happening. Eric said in this same speech on Sunday that the graduate 10 years from now would get an iPod that had 85 years of video on it, running 24 hours a day. You'll store it on the iPod of 2019. So as you've got that kind of basically free infinite storage, that generation that I just talked about is going to fill it up.
I think the audience gets their chance to vote.
Did it change any of the panelists' mind?
I'm still...
Green, green, green. It's green, green.
Green, lots of green.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, do it again, guys. Very green. Very green. Tony, I think you have the task of doing the next crowd.
Okay, the
Crowdsourced
crowd says that wireless broadband will be one of the only IT sectors to see increased funding this year and in the near future, fueled by demand for faster, better networking, but also by government subsidies. The communications and networking sector was the only IT sectors to maintain steadily increasing funding through 2008. This year, the trend continued, with the sector doing better in Q109 than Q108. The leader was broadband wireless internet service provider Open Range, which received $100 million in the first quarter of 2009, one of the largest investments this year. The government plans to provide $7 billion to accelerate broadband deployment to rural areas. Wireless broadband was mentioned 2,429 new news articles last year, compared to more than 3,000 new news articles the year before. So do we have fast enough wireless networks?
All red. All red.
Obviously not crowd pleasers.
Referendum on our portfolio.
It's also fairly boring, and we need to get back on
Thanks,
schedule.
Jason. I really like doing that trend. Oh, that
I
was
do
really
not
fun.
take responsibility. The crowd.
Joe, you guys do wireless. Any wisdom here, or is this
This is a
purely
trend.
boring
This
and
is-
stupid?
This has happened. This is passé.
Passe? And that's what you feel? Are we happy with our network performance?
No.
No.
We're not.
We'll never be.
Okay.
We won't be next year or 10 years from now.
But are you happy with your PC performance?
No.
Okay. Well, you're a power
In fact,
user.
my word has gotten slower over the last 25 years.
Everybody here would agree that on the best performing day, the iPhone service from AT&T is horrible. And the
Right.
rest of the time, it's crappy.
Right.
Look, look, the fact is, the more bandwidth we get, the more things we'll try and do to the point where it's uncomfortable. So it'll always be unsatisfactory, because we'll fill up the bandwidth and then try a little bit more.
So I think we can get right back on schedule by seeing whether this crowd is smarter than the larger crowd of journalists and, and the government. So let's see if you guys like it. Very, very, very red. You hate it. Which means we can go straight on to Vinod.
So I have two important words in my trend. First, main tech, not clean tech. And the second is capitalism-based. First, I want to give you perspective. This is not a one-year trend. This is not a 5-year trend. It's sort of a 25-year trend. And at this point, it's almost independent of climate science. I happen to believe climate science is probably right, but even if climate science was completely wrong, there is enough momentum for enough laws to be pushed through globally that we will have a carbon-constrained economy. And frankly, that's a good thing, because it's like buying insurance. We buy flood insurance, fire insurance, and in every other kind of insurance. All our defense spending is insurance, all our anti-nuke spending is insurance, and this is another kind of insurance which affects far more people than just one minor little nuclear explosion in some city. It will feel minor relative to the risk of climate change. And so we are dealing with very large risks, and so hence insurance important, so we will have a carbon-constrained economy. When you have a carbon-constrained economy, the question isn't how wind power gets to be 10% or 15% or even 20% of our power generation, how solar becomes to be 10% of our power generation. It's the other 80 or 90% that matters. And that's why environmentalists generally play on the fringe, which I call clean tech. I think we're dealing with main tech. How do we fundamentally, you can't change the carbon emissions of this planet by 80% by operating on 10 or 20% of our infrastructure. And so it has to be main tech, not clean tech. The second obvious thing is you can't do this change based on subsidies or regulations. It has to be capitalism driven. And the good news is all the technology trends I see say that we will have new technologies, low carbon technologies that can compete unsubsidized with their fossil competitors. And frankly, they have to compete unsubsidized if they're going to operate in the fastest growing energy markets and infrastructure markets in the world, which are India and China. And so this subsidy constrained legal world is just a starting hatchery for the technologies that will sweep fossil technologies away, and it'll be a long-term trend. So capitalism is important in this trend, unsubsidized market competitiveness is important, and to get away from clean tech into main tech is important. So stop there.
Oh, panelists?
Ooh.
Oh, all right.
One comment I would make about Vinod's trend, I'm on a university board, and it's a university of about 12,000 students in the center of the country, the University of St. Thomas, but it has some very deep science majors. And when we talk about how new industries get started, it really has to be appealing to the newly educated. They have to have, the true entrepreneurs look for something to apply themselves to versus I'm going to get my PhD, which some of them will do. But the energy level at the university level to applying the new sciences to these definable areas, the consumables in particular, is very, very, very high. And so from a venture capital perspective, even though we don't invest in this area, this is really an integrated science. It's computer science, it's materials science, it's biotechnology, and it chops itself well into addressable opportunities for young entrepreneurs at very capital efficient pieces. So the way Vinod has articulated this versus the big bang theory of clean tech investing really does give it a better direction, I think, for venture investing, and does express what really is happening at the grassroots entrepreneur level.
I just want to add a thought because Ann triggered this thought. If you went 4 years or 5 years ago, you went to MIT or Stanford or Caltech or Berkeley and said, which of the engineering students are interested in a PhD in energy? The answer would be nobody. Maybe nanotechnology, biotechnology, genetics, computer science, I could go down the list. Today, the number one choice for the brightest students is energy-related stuff.
It's true at the managerial levels. It's true
It's
at all
true
levels. There's a flock of
every
human
level.
talent. Right.
Management teams from all over calling me. I'm in this old business. I'd really like to do anything in this new area. It's the PhDs. And the PhDs in 5 to 10 years will start inventing new stuff. And they're a lot more cross-disciplinary than they've ever been. So this is going to be a really, really exciting area when this new talent comes out of the universities. I'm really excited what happens sort of 5 to 10 years hence. And we will completely reinvent the infrastructure of society.
You could.
But Ron was hedging there, I think.
Well, I was hedging
Because of two reasons. One, I do agree that this is something very important for the country and the world, so I'm not disagreeing on the need to reduce carbon emissions. The question really comes to, is this a viable opportunity for venture-backed companies, given the nature of the investments required and the time horizon over which it will likely succeed? So, but again, nobody has won betting against Vinod. He's always been very successful and early to pick out these trends. So I want to be very constructive in what I say. Come
on, he's not always right.
Pretty much.
I just hide the failure as well.
Yeah, he learned that at Kleiner Perkins.
So the challenge really is to figure out what is the sort of the flagship company in green in this area that's going to show the way that there is actually a return for investors, that capitalism actually works here. Because capitalism couldn't be, let's sort of socialize the losses and continue to keep investing, where the new government puts more money in and then we continue to keep spending, towards a green future where we don't have necessarily viable companies that on a cost per kilowatt hour basis actually can effectively compete in the short term against fossil fuels. So it's a question of, do we spend more of that money on new alternative forms of fuel, or do we spend it on efficiency? Because all of our electrical systems are built to sort of peak capacity, and in fact, if we were better consumers of electricity or power or energy, we would actually try to lower that peak load requirement so that the need is much lower and the efficiency of the grid is greater. So I would rather see more investments in that area than in alternative fuels.
Joe, you've been unnaturally silent.
I voted for Vinod, but for the first time since I think I've known you, I don't think you went far enough. And let me tell you why. I don't actually think it's about carbon emissions per se. And last year I talked about water. I think when we get all done with the global warming hysteria and some of the reaction and overreaction, and I'm really not sure about climate science, what I am sure about is the problem is probably going to get defined as consumption. Consumption of any and all resources that we have that are finite on Earth. So I think the problem that the generation I just talked about is going to have to deal with, and you look at all of these things, plastics and water and appliances and steel and cement and glass, we have 6 billion some people on the planet, going to 7, going to 8, going to 9. There is a finite limit. So the quicker we start to think about anything that we take from the Earth, how can we minimize the impact of doing that, is going to be the right way to think about life. And I think carbon is going to end up being put into a category of something that we need to worry about alongside of water and alongside of the whole natural resource spectrum.
Yeah, I should agree with you and with Ram. My view is general. I think technology is the only resource multiplier we have. There's 500 million people with a decent lifestyle on this planet, another 5 billion, which will add to that in the next 30 years or so.
The subject we should have a separate conversation about, which is I think your underlying theme, which is research in this country, applied science is moving more and more towards a venture capital model, and much to our maybe dismay, away from the big company. I mean, when I got here, it was all about IBM and Bell Labs and these and HP, and these institutions are not producing what they did. And so I think it's up to us to fill that.
So I just want to clarify. Our view of main tech, we have a cement company, we are reinventing cement. We have a glass company, we're reinventing glass. We have 3 engine companies to reinvent engines. We have 3 bioplastics companies to reinvent plastics. We have 3 lighting companies to reinvent lighting. We even have an air conditioning company, a motor company. I mean, it is the infrastructure of society. This is not about just solar power and biofuels. In fact, that's sort of less than half our portfolio. Most of it is about using 1/10 the electricity to have better light than these yellow incandescent lights, or having an engine go 2 to 3 times further on the same amount of energy. Or, so,
I think we're all in
Yeah.
agreement. I mean, the innovation is led by startups. A lot of these are eminently backable, and I think you will see some of these flagship IPOs in the next couple of years that makes this trend a true one, and one I fully agree with. In fact, it's been driving our clean tech investment theme for about the last 10 years, not to rely on any subsidy or government regulation for survival. And perhaps for a term, you could use green tech, right?
Yep.
Which is often bandied about, that the green is the bottom line, right? Not the
So
the
just
environment.
curiously, are the companies you're backing in main tech in the United States, or?
most of them, though not all, originated in the United States. There's many great scientists and ideas. You know, one of the fundamental things about this area I find is it's based on PhDs. So we're trying to hire more PhDs into our firm. It's back to basic physics, chemistry, biology, reinvention of those things that went away into the backwaters when everybody wanted to do computer science. And so the ideas come from all over the world. We tend to be focused here, so a lot of people move to the US. In fact, I joke, I'm one of the few Indians insourcing jobs into the United States.
Get
Shall
the
we-
new model down.
We moved quite a few companies into this country.
Very interesting.
Tony, shall we see whether the audience dares to disagree
Yes,
with Vinod
we-
Khosla?
Dare to join ROM?
I have never seen a more
Almost
full
unanimous. I think I see one red.
Who? That person over there.
Yes.
No, two?
Yeah, would you come sit next to ROM so he can?
Wow.
So let's look at the next crowdsourced
Panel
trend.
and the
I
audience.
think it's a new record.
So the next crowdsourced trend spins off what Ram was saying. It's about the smart grid and smart meters. Power and efficiency management services will see a flowering of investment and innovation as we realize we cannot have an alternative energy future without a smarter energy infrastructure. And again, government handouts don't hurt either. So smart meter services had a $317 million in venture funding in 2008, an increase of 37%, and the Obama administration plans to go and give fully $11 billion to the smart grid and to smart meters. And there's been a relatively large increase in news mentions, 1,232 news articles in the past year compared to around 1,000 the year before. So does the panel believe that smart grid and smart meters will see investment and will produce innovation in the next couple of years? Ooh,
All right.
that's good. So you're hedging.
Well, I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to reinvent the total grid. I'm less convinced about smart meters. I have built a home, I'm building a home for a long time, a green home up in St. Helena, and I have measured this thing. I bought a 3-phase power meter, and you know, you get a smart meter and it tells you all this stuff. And then the question is, so what? You know, I realized I was burning twice the kilowatt hours I thought I was going to build, and the only way I could go figure it out is to invest $2,500 in a storage power meter, and then I had to go put it on all of the major things in the house for 2 days while I ran a normal cycle. The average person isn't going to do that. You know, if we take the next step, which is to connect the device where it's powered in the home to the smart meter so there can be a closed loop, and you can do something with the information. Today, we're hyping this smart meter so it'll tell you a lot, but we haven't begun to think about the problem in terms of what the so what is. That's why I went this way.
A smart meter connected to a mesh network is where, you know, it makes sense, because then you could turn on and off devices and use them, the high-power devices you use when, you know, it does
And
not
that gets
peak.
into home automation and
Yeah,
all the things we've
right,
been failing
right.
at for 20 years.
No, but
Brought to you-
but it
brought
also
to
gets
you-
into networking that we know well for a long time.
Brought to you by PG&E, who is one step below the post office and the telephone company is a good supplier. So
Steve?
Well, I'm not a big enthusiast of the smart meter in the home today, but they're nevertheless, when you look at the general area of power and efficiency management services, it's undeniable there's an insane amount of waste going on in the grid, in data centers, and all up and down the stack. And to be able to remotely manage resources that are left on for peak needs, right? So data centers left on all the time, it's only used, you know, less than 20% of the time. It adds up to an enormous amount of waste overall. The companies like Enernoc, I think, are paving the way and showing what can be done. This was a company we first invested in a few years ago, and it now has already prevented 60 power plants from being produced. What they do is just aggregate diesel gensets, refrigerators, stuff at an industry, right? It's not in the consumer's home, but places where you can dim the lights, where you can turn them off at night, where you can say, look, users, can we have some control in a central way over the data network of all of your both generating capacity and your usage? And if we have a peak need, instead of having a brownout or building a power plant we only need for a few hours each year, we'll be able to dial things back. And in so doing, they've already signed up 3 gigawatts of synthesized capacity that now the grid otherwise doesn't need, and it's distributed capacity. And so that's just one of many examples that are coming down the pipe. We have about 4 different companies working in this area, both in the US and China, where they see they can make a watt not spent the best watt you've ever conserved.
There is sort of an odd statement in this trend here saying startups did well because they got $317 million in VC funding. That's not how we judge whether the startups did well, as how much funding they got.
That's true.
So I do want to clarify that.
That is true.
I think what we're saying here is that it's a sufficiently hard and interesting and has a provable result in the end for those that make it work. I'm not sure that pouring $11 billion more on it accelerates the pace of innovation here. But it's going to be a problem set that is, again, is there an addressable market? Are there customers that really want to see cost savings here and improvement? Definitely, and they're everywhere, from us as consumers to the enterprises themselves. Is it a sufficiently interesting problem that's addressable with reasonable amounts of capital, cut out that $11 billion, to build some significant companies here? Likely. And I think that's why we're supporting it as a trend. I don't think it's easy. So I do think that of those companies that got the $317 million in 2008, that some of that is lost money.
Yeah. Well, we are going to talk, if we have time, about whether or not the Obama stimulus package is going to have a malign or a benign effect upon our industries. But perhaps we will ask the audience what they think about smart meters and smart grids. Do we agree with the crowd? I guess I do. Tony? What do you think? Yeah, okay. Steve?
Yeah. Great. So run with it?
Run with it.
Okay. So perhaps like Vinod's forecast, I'm trying to look a little farther out than just the next year. So I think there'll be some important trends from this that play out in the next year, but it's more over the next 5 or so years that I see this having an impact. What is it referring to? The distributed web, the aggregate power of all of you, what you think, what you do, your daily activities, will have some pretty profound impact, not only on large media properties of the past, but also telecom industries, and I'll try to end with an example of one forward-looking example, search as we know it going forward. So what does the trend say? That innovation occurs at the edge. This is true in biological innovation, it's true in startups. It's not the warm center of the sort of thinking or a centralized model, but people out on the fringe, sort of as metaphor. More precisely, what I'm referring to is the power of you. So, user-generated content is already obviously more important than the centralized media of the world, right? Most of what a teenager reads today was written by someone they know, which is kind of astounding. It speaks perhaps to Joe's point. We're inevitably moving down a path where the aggregate creation of many authors is more important than a few centralized media outlets. If you think about where information is spread and how people communicate, you look within social networks, it's again amongst clusters of small social graphs, a group of peers communicating with each other within a social network, not all reading the same centralized star topology of information flooding out from one place. And recently there was a Nielsen report just a couple of days ago showing that sure enough, as you suspected, more time is spent on social networks than email. So we've reached that tipping point already. Now that's the past. What I think is interesting about the trend is how can you leverage this from a business sense? Where are the opportunities for new entrants to make some money off this, to aggregate and take advantage of this capability at the peers, out at the nodes, out at your client desktop, as opposed to a web server? And one of the interesting things, I think, is that although intelligence moves to the edge, whether that be web services, whether that be client software on your iPhone and iApps, whether that be peer-to-peer networking and what you can do with that, that's a trend that's been going on for many years. But people haven't really figured out a business model. How can you take advantage of all that aggregate output that's out there? In fact, the concept of crowdsourcing is one way of thinking about that. How can you rise up one layer and say, how can I take advantage of the group? I mean, the fact that half of this year's trends were crowdsourced, if you will, is I think one indication that things are tipping for the first time. So how do you take advantage of this federated group? Let me give maybe just 3 quick examples. In the area of content, let's say you're a media property. Let's say you want to reach women on the web. iVillage has been trying this for 10 years with a centralized model. And recently they changed, but for 10 years they tried the centralized model, and they were stuck at around 16 million uniques, meaning it just wasn't that compelling to women. I don't know how many of you go to iVillage regularly, but in aggregate the statistics say they're not the winner. They were number 1, they're no longer number 1. A new entrant from 2005 came in called Glam, an Accel portfolio company as well as one of ours, to be fair. And they aggregated all the long tail, all the little blogging sites, all the user-generated content, rolled them up and provided an advertising model, a business model for all that content that was going unmonetized. And they rose within 2 years to be the number 1 women's site. 1 year later, they became a top 10 property on the internet, according to ComScore, right? More than Facebook, more users per month than many of the companies you've heard of. And certainly within their demographic, right, which is aiming just at women, they exceed the traffic of all traditional media properties combined. iVillage, Yahoo Women, AOL Women, Condé Nast, and just about every one you can think of that was targeting women. Add them all up, this one user-generated content blogging aggregation play gets more views per month, 100 million a month. Pretty amazing. And they are just one example, right? There's countless examples of this. If you're Facebook, right, very interesting story, right? How would you best advertise on Facebook? We're just now learning that you don't, let's say if you're BMW, advertise to someone who says, I like BMW, I have one. Much better is to look at the social graph and advertise to the person whose friends say they're interested in BMW, but they don't. They're more likely to be a buyer than an already existing customer or enthusiast. And we're just beginning to see the beginning of this. I think UGC will trump centralized content. I'll be more brief in the second example. Telecom, $1 trillion a year services industry, radically restructured. One day you will not pay a phone bill as a separate bill. That is just a truism. It'll probably take 20 years before we look back and say, oh yeah, I once paid a phone bill. Just like one day, today you look back and say, I once paid an email bill. You used to pay for email software and you used to pay an annual $5 use subscription fee. It's just a data service. Telephony is just a data service. Video conferencing is just a data service. And when Skype spins out of eBay and goes public in the next 6 months, which they claim they're going to do, you'll finally see what they've always dreamed of, which is mobile communications. Right? They were Europeans, for God's sake. They never thought you'd speak with a computer. Right? Their founding vision was Wi-Fi handsets, and it's been the carrier's perpetual attempt to crush Skype that has prevented that from happening. And because eBay is a multinational corporation, they have to kowtow to the carriers and their overt pressure. A free standalone company, you'll finally see the Wi-Fi phones. They're always meant to be. Whenever you're at home, work, or anywhere you got Wi-Fi, you just talk for free. And that'll be, of course, the catalyst for changing the entire telecom industry to data services overlay. Last example, looking forward, something that hasn't been announced yet, but there are a number of companies working in an entirely new way, a better way to do search. You hear some rumbles about it around Twitter and other products that can give you the real-time web. What's hot right now? What's going on right now? The blog search engines don't quite do it. They're getting better. What you'd really love to know is where are people surfing right now for certain types of search, not information search. The Wolfram Alphas will still have a role, Google will still have a role, but there's a kind of finding of information that's missing out there. And if you think about it, a lot of that has to do with web crawling, the centralized model. Build the big data center, heat it, put tons of energy into it, and try to know everything from the structure of the web, the founding vision of PageRank. Much more effective would be, what if I knew what actually was going on in every browser, where you were actually surfing? If I could preserve privacy, yet watch where people surf, where do they spend time, you will get recency for free. You'll avoid spammers and SEO kinds of problems, the search engine optimization game and cat and mouse game that Google has, so that all the bad results around IRS searches and stuff that have been notorious would go away for free. You get the deep web for free, Craigslist, eBay, things you didn't even think to find out in your search engine because you need it to be very fast and not put a load on all those sites that ban robots. You get all that for free too. So all the problems with search are solved if you instead distribute the entire search engine, have no servers, have no crawlers, and federate the desktops of many individuals in what they do day to day. There's companies like Wowd that will be soon releasing a product in the US. It's right now only in Europe, and others that are pursuing that vision, and I think it would be quite exciting. It may fail, but if it succeeds, I think it would harness the power of the collective wisdom of the crowds in a way that you can't do with just algorithms and centralized servers. I think you all are smarter than any one computer. That's the turn.
The panel must
Do we
vote.
have a panelist vote? Wow.
Joe has abused his position next to me to demand the first word, which
I
granted
first
him.
read about this trend in 1982. when Stuart Brand and Larry Brilliant were putting together the well in Sausalito. But if I understood what you said, Steve, which would be the first time, I agree with you.
Remember, Steve was in second grade in 1982.
I think it was probably 1998 when we funded Napster.
Wait, let me go get you. I'm not saying peer-to-peer is something new. I'm saying, how do you build the business model on top of it? I don't think Napster quite nailed it.
Oh, they nailed the business model. They just got nailed by the entertainment industry later. So
since I was probably the only one on the panel who agreed with Steve.
Joe did.
Oh, you agreed with me? Okay. I think
You're going to change your mind?
No, I haven't changed my mind. I think what Steve was trying to say, and I don't think he sort of quite said it this way, so maybe I'll extend what you said.
Yes, please.
So we can agree.
Thank you, Vinod.
I was struggling with this idea.
No, look, this notion of applications built on top of crowdsourcing, the notion of applications built on recency, and frankly, the fundamental new phenomena of the real-time web, of which Twitter is just one baby step again. It's the edge of real-time where people talk to people, devices talk to devices, and all kinds of interaction happen in real time. And there's really, to tie it into what Ann said earlier, there's sort of data in that's extremely valuable that can be extracted. To me, that's another application of unstructured data and crowdsourcing. I think this fundamental notion that we have to consume media originated from a central thing, edited, is dying. There will be some value to it. There'll be niche brands established that do that well. But this whole idea of recency and crowdsourcing applications is very important. And frankly, I think the real-time extensions of the web are going to be very, very important and give rise to all new applications that we haven't started to imagine.
yeah, I think that if, we haven't really talked about cloud, which is really an abused term these days, but realistically in the virtualized enterprise environment, the concept of cloud bursting is already happening. The largest user of Amazon Web Services is Eli Lilly. And even the New York Times is one where they figured out that they could actually put 11 million objects on Amazon and actually use them as part of a potentially future business model. But that again is very temporal, real time. It's data you need now to crunch it. It really is, when you talk about distributed, it's even more distributed than the fixed distribution that Vinod has talked about, because it becomes the virtual web as needed in the cloud environment.
Was it a compute service that you're referring to, where they just, Eli Lilly uses the cloud, uses EC2 to
Yeah, they use
do
it
that work?
as a temporal
So it's compute services. Yeah.
So we should hear from Ram, since he sits on the board for Google.
We've been sitting there silent.
Well, so I agree with the real-time web. I'm not sure that's how Steve described what he was proposing as this trend. So, the real-time web, in terms of new data with recency, is very, very important and should be something that's searchable, just as news is searchable every minute or every 10 minutes. I think the Google index searches news as often as every 10 minutes. And even that is an index that's of huge size. I mean, the scale of these problems, when you think of the back end of it, of making sure that you're able to have the index complete its search and then get it across the edge of the network, is not a trivial problem. So we could sit here and say, let's keep creating more data. And the other problem, I think, with the real-time web is it has to be not overrun by spam. So there's a great risk that it is going to be less useful if it gets overrun by spam. And we already have the beginnings of that problem. So, I'd make those two comments, but I'm not going to disagree that the real-time web is not important. It's very, very important for a number of reasons. You would know, for example, if there's a a particular event happening in a part of city where there's a traffic congestion, or there is a water leak of a main on a particular street and you want to bypass it. I mean, somebody twittering on that is very useful to you. Or other, any other type of information that you value recency on is very, very useful. So that said, I think the question of peer-to-peer without a business model, I don't think exists as a viable opportunity, and I haven't seen those emerge. And that's, I think, ultimately going to be the fuel to regenerate sort of peer-to-peer as a big opportunity for entrepreneurs in the room.
But Ram, I did extend it to applications of crowdsourcing. If you think of crowdsourcing as an operating system or a platform, then
Right.
applications of crowdsourcing are important.
And I am about to talk about the application economy, and the crowdsourcing applications are one of them. The challenge is, how do you, I mean, a lot of these will be small companies with 3 to 5 to 10 people where the proprietor takes home $500,000 a year. It isn't necessarily, if you aggregate all of them, maybe there's a big opportunity. But today, there are multiple small opportunities.
This is a really important point. I think not every business has to make sense for venture capital.
Right.
In fact, the most robust and interesting businesses are the businesses that let somebody get into business for themselves, like eBay did, make $10,000 a month and sort of have a good living. And in fact, it somehow feels like the iPhone application set will be that kind of model.
Exactly.
Where there's lots of people who could successfully build businesses and live off those applications, but there isn't a Microsoft to emerge out of that.
Right.
Our hosts are flashing a sign saying I must move on. So, do the members of the Churchill Club believe in Steve's trend as Steve expressed it, not as Vinod edited and improved it? Yeah. I think that, well, it's green. It's green, Steve. With quite a few dissenters.
It's clustered though. There's some haters.
Yeah, there's some
kinda over there.
haters. There's got a pool of hatred in there.
Well, at least it's real-time data.
You have the dullest trend of the evening.
Yes,
to
thank
read
you,
out.
Jason. I appreciate this.
Yeah.
Which
Can
I
we
know.
I
skip this
carefully
one in the
organized
interest of
it,
time?
Steve.
Yeah, let's skip this one.
A
Wrong.
real-time vote.
Yeah, I always do what Vinod says. Let's keep moving.
Yeah.
Okay, this is about healthcare? Are we
Healthcare.
voting against it?
Yeah, we've already voted.
All right,
So
we're done
Ram,
then.
on to you.
go to 9.
Ram.
Okay. So what I want to talk, first of all, I have,
Your slide set is behind.
What go?
Here we go.
Here we go.
so first of all, I don't have a company or a particular portfolio business in this segment, so I'm not trying to promote anything here. So that's the spirit of full disclosure. The other thing is I noticed in 2008 there were 3 mobile things mentioned in some form or another. What this aims to do is to build on applications on top of mobile and social networks, which are sort of converging into one big opportunity. So the crowdsourcing part of this is what Vinod was talking about as far as applications on top of crowdsourcing. And then the mobile piece is what happens with the iPhone world and the app stores and so forth. So why is this important? Other than advertising, almost all of the success of the internet today rests on one single business model, which is ad-based. And you can even take Amazon into that. I mean, I was at Amazon for a number of years back when we were shipping physical products and we thought we were going to make money that way. Today's Amazon makes money by building a marketplace where essentially every one of those links that take you to a product is in fact an ad. So, and they essentially revenue share. So you can call it revenue share or you can call it an ad, but it's the same thing. They make more money on not shipping goods, but referring customers to other goods that they want to buy than shipping goods out of their own warehouses. So most of it is based on this ad model. There needs to be a new model if there needs to be more and more growth. And I think that new model is emerging in the form of applications. So in the last year, there were over 3 billion applications downloaded on the internet, and most of those were either on social networks or on phones. So if you think about that, that's 40 to 50 million daily active users. Now, today, less than 5% of them are paid applications, and that's okay because the trend is increasingly towards paid applications. Now, the average application that a user pays for costs The same as iTunes. It's 99 cents up to $2.99 or $3.99. I think there's a threshold at which the user won't pay. For example, many of you have call waiting on your phones and you pay $3.99 a month. Do you even use it once a month? You don't. But you don't think a second time about paying for it because you want the convenience of it. In this case, a lot of users will pay for applications up to $2 or $3. And so there's this new app economy emerging that I think will become an important trend. Now, there are lots of little companies in this space. There is not going to be a big winner, at least none that I can see. But if you aggregate all of these companies, it's equivalent to $1 billion of revenue and perhaps a $10 billion market cap business. So it's a viable opportunity. It's real. It's out there. It just will not support large companies today. So I would say that this is a trend and a real trend, and one that will continue to grow, because you know for sure that as Facebook grows and as the smartphone industry continues to grow the way they are, there is going to be a need for new revenue sources to support these companies and these activities. For example, as voice rates continue to drop, you can see the flat rate data plans are actually filling the gap in revenue for the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, the Facebooks of the world are going to need an application-based economy to support their business over time, because it's clear that ads are not going to support that model. So this is why I think this is an important trend and one that on which you can build real companies.
Panelist? Wow.
And why do you disbelieve?
Well, I mean, I agree with this being, you know, a lot of cottages, so a cottage industry. 10 billion isn't that big when it comes down to it. So I think it's really, really interesting for small businesses.
Today. 10 billion is today.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. You know, I still think there's a lot of friction in this model for the mobile phone. They're called carriers. And you know, that's why people don't use most of this stuff, because you know it's impossible to actually figure out what you have on your phone or how to use it. I think it's possibly the one thing I do agree with is in the coming decade, but it seems like it's got a lot of friction to this model still, and also
I completely disagree. I think user interfaces are being optimized. I think you've got better operating environments on these phones in terms of the browsers and so forth. The applications are easy to download and use. We are at the beginning of this trend, and the beginning of it is already a potentially $1 billion revenue stream with probably 3,000-4,000 little businesses being supported under it. I think it's only going to accelerate. Now, whether it'll support venture-backed companies, there I have to agree with Ann. It's probably not a venture opportunity.
If you're coming out of a university today and you're a smart person and you've got a computer science degree, you know, you're going to send your resume to Google, who's not hiring, or Hewlett-Packard, who's not hiring, or Cisco, who's not hiring in the U.S., or any other great companies, or you're going to do what about 100,000 people did and go off and write an iPhone app and see if you can't make a buck. It's the new world.
An interesting question is, where would, you know, we've been talking about the mobile opportunity, which I agree with, because again, I quoted earlier, but there are twice as many mobile users, phone users, as people use the internet. So if you say, hey, all the phones become internet enabled, that doubles the amount of internet users, which is a huge ramp. But where would we be today if there was no iPhone? You know, it just seems like iPhone was like this breakout, out of the nowhere technology that is.
That's what it always takes.
But if you go to
But we couldn't have
countries like
predicted
India
that
and
like 2
China,
years ago.
no,
It's just kind of interesting.
Nobody did if you go back through the last 10 years.
I think we're too U.S.-centric in our thinking here. If you travel around the world, they don't have
Ron's
iPhones, and
completely
they're using a lot of data applications on there. The other thing on walled gardens, I think those walled gardens of AT&T and Verizon are coming down because they're seeing revenue, they're seeing dollar signs, and they're saying we're going to open up our networks to these applications. And they will do revenue share deals, and they will build their own app stores and take the 30% margin on it. And as the iPhone prices come down to much lower levels, and Apple can no longer make money on the hardware, which is the big place where they have been making money, they're going to need to have these applications be the source of their revenue.
particularly in emerging markets, it's mobile devices that are going to be driving the future. You go to India and China, the devices that are used could not be less like the iPhone, and yet they are becoming very quickly the dominant digital platform. I want to go and do the 10th crowdsourced trend. Oh, no, we have to vote on this. I'm sorry, forgive me.
I'll read
Ram, I'm sorry.
I'll change my vote.
You changed your vote?
Change my vote.
Whoa, that's all green. Ram, you've scored, I think, the hit.
There's still some haters.
There's some haters over there.
Those BlackBerry users.
So I want to do the 10th crowdsourced trend quickly so Tony and I can do 2 trends we really believe in. So this is about the e-reading devices. This is that electronic displays will be the hottest investment in hardware this year and the next as startups compete to create the thin, flexible, colorful screens of the future. So 28% increase in venture funding since 2007. And not a single one of them likes it.
Oh, no, wait.
It will be a huge growth area. It will quickly get commoditized at the hardware area. So what I take issue with is the hottest investment in hardware. It's not going to make anybody any money, but we'll all have one.
That's right. It's like an oxymoron. You know, hot hardware investment. Those 3 words don't ever go together.
It's a conversation we were having about MIT earlier.
That's true. I was trying to get a hardware trend in there for folks. Let's go and see what the audience thinks of it, and then we'll move on to. You see, you guys think you're smarter than the crowd, which is good.
Get a unanimous red vote?
No, there's some greens there. There's contrarians.
There's a green person at the back. Okay, so Tony, let's do our bonus trends, because I know that people on the panel feel kind of passionately about them.
Oh, good. I'm
You have
glad
to
you do.
identify whose trend it was.
So
They're
number
both our
11.
trends. We both believe in them.
Yeah, so the first one is DC, as in District of Columbia, will prove to be a poor VC. Venture-backed companies, industries will continue to be the largest contributors to job and wealth creation in the United States. The federal government's attempt to fund new technologies will pale in comparison in terms of long-term ROI, and in many instances will have a negative impact by over-flooding bad ideas with lots of money.
So the Obama administration is planning to give more than $87 billion in stimulus funding to technologies. And you can make a very good argument that regarded only as macroeconomic policy, this is a bad idea because investment in technology tends to take a long time, doesn't create much in the way of jobs, and in fact, in the short term can actually eliminate jobs. But more than that, the Obama administration is doing something unique in American history, with one exception. They're reaching deep into the technology industry to select specific technologies which they wish to fund. And I propose, and I know Tony agrees, that government is a particularly poor judge of new technologies. And I can think of 3 examples where governments have tried to do this with very bad examples, very bad results. Ethanol in this country in the 70s, which has laden us with a 25-year history of subsidizing a fundamentally uneconomical fuel. The French government decided that they thought the internet was simply too Anglo-Saxon and capitalist and funded Minitel, which had no other effect than simply to retard the growth of the internet in China over decades. And then finally, the Japanese, at the very height of the PC revolution, as it was beginning to bubble, decided that they were going to fund their way out of their decline by investing in the supercomputer industry. So I am an East Coast member of the media liberal elite and find our president as dreamy as the next man. But but despite that, I cannot with any conscience think that the technology provisions are anything but really bad government policy.
And they appropriately positioned me on your right. And I actually like this trend because I think there has been this feeling that somehow there's this great hope out there in the government is going to take us out of whatever we've been in. And there's really a lack of the use of the bully pulpit in Washington to talk about what America is really about, which is the people in this room, it's risk-taking, It's, you know, it's free market capitalism, it's initiative, things of that nature. So I'm just kind of sounding the warning bells that, you know, all this money that's going to be spent isn't necessarily going to put us in a better spot. It's really entrepreneurs that will do that.
And the point is, we have a method for doing this in this country. Government funds discovery research inside universities, and technology transfer departments and venture capitalists pull it into the market. These people are called risk capitalists for a reason, and it's worked in this country for 50 years.
Of all the damage we're doing in Washington, this is probably near the top of the list. Let's think about it. In 2000, we had what, Dan, 1,050 venture firms in the US. We're down to 550, so we're about 50% off. We don't have a problem of capital, and we need to get back to a model that's going to work, we probably need to get rid of another 50%. We probably need to get down to 200 to 300. I'm hearing lots of challenges. I am not hearing a challenge that says what we need is more capital. And for the government, who is as far away from the problem as anything, to be deciding what has to happen, we all know that the best ideas happen at the entrepreneurial level, and they come to us. And that's the model. And all the great companies started that way.
Can government screw up markets by overfunding, or?
They can't do anything but.
Well,
Tony, didn't you write a book about this? It was called the .com bust?
Yeah, the internet bubble.
Can the panelists vote on Tony's and my trend just to see if they think we're right?
Sure.
Ooh, Ram disagrees.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're sorry.
Okay, I'm going to claim victory.
Violent agreement.
I got to go to the airport.
Well, I want to see what the audience thinks. We're in the heart of Silicon Valley. I know you all love him. I love him too, but
Speak for yourself.
by a large agree with a few people who want some of that money.
But no, again, I want to say that, you know, as much as when we interviewed Al Gore and we had no idea what he was talking about back in the red herring days, you know, I think that his inconvenient truth, which, you know, of course he won a Nobel Prize for science fiction for, actually...
You promised you wouldn't, Tony.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that actually that was a good thing, because I think it's an example of a leader, you know, standing up and saying, hey, we got a problem here, you know, let's go think about it. But it didn't have to do with anything of government spending money. So I think Obama, as charismatic as he is, you know, can do a lot of great things by cheerleading on, you know, the entrepreneurial system, as opposed to feeling that, you know, the only solution is spending.
Does that mean when they get this money and they go do a road show, if they ever get that far, they're going to have to take the Secretary of Commerce with them on the road show, or a government official? I mean, this is...
Well, forget the roadshow. I think the greater risk is if the government steps in and starts to invest capital in businesses where they want to pick winners. I think there's a great risk that they're going to pick companies that would otherwise economically not be viable and continue to keep funding them.
Right.
So the only possible justification is there are a large number of actually very attractive alternative energy companies who have been particularly hard hit by the decrease in oil prices, which we actually do want to fund as a bridge to the next era. Vinod, do you think that there's a justification in funding at the moment uneconomical energy companies? Like his?
You know, this is a very complex question. Nuclear power would not be viable other than its subsidy. For a technology where 90% of the cost is upfront costs, almost every nuclear plant is subsidized with federal dollars, both in this country, in France, and other places. And at 15% rates of return, nuclear power would be uneconomic. It's about $6,000 a kilowatt, when coal power is $2,500 a kilowatt. And the only difference is the coal guys have to have 15% rates of return, and the nuclear guys get federal loan guarantees, so it's 4% or 5%. Same thing, you can look in any one of these areas and find hidden subsidies. There isn't an oil lease that's really auctioned off at market prices, for example. So there's all kinds of hidden subsidies. Should we push particular technologies? I don't think we should. We talked about smart grid. The fact is, smart grid is an interesting category, but is it among the top 5 that should be paid attention to? No. Why? Because a smart grid can reduce our demand by 10 or 15%. But in fact, new renewable generation could go to 50%. And so there's much more leverage in other technologies. Having said that, providing incubation support where certain industries are interested in keeping them down or out is helpful. So some level of sort of hatchery is valuable. I think the easiest way to do it is based on carbon constraints, because that's what we are trying to achieve, rather than pick technologies. One thing you realize is there are favorites in Washington, and they don't always make logical sense, but it's sort of not the best choice, but is it a decent second best choice? If done smartly, it could be. I do think the potential for significant damage, as Tony said, absolutely exists and is likely to happen.
Don't you have to separate the government putting money into research, which is a good thing, versus the government putting money into venture? Give me an example of one company that's been subsidized, that's gotten great venture returns. It just doesn't happen. Okay. This is about venture capital.
So I absolutely agree we should be funding a lot more research. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I think there's certain categories where the government's supporting nascent industries. Wind wouldn't have gotten started had it not been supported. It's getting fairly viable today. I don't think solar would have gotten started had it not gotten some startup help. I personally like to tell people in Washington, don't support anything after more than 5 years or 7 years. Cut it off, give it technology a chance to hatch, then cut it off. But it is a delicate balance because there are all kinds of entrenched interests.
Tony, the signaling we must do our 12th trend and wrap it up.
Yes, which is all yours, buddy, our attempt to keep our jobs.
The rumors of the demise of the reporter have been much exaggerated. So, Tony and I accept that there will be a terrible clearing in journalism, that many much-loved newspapers and magazines will deservedly close. And we accept it's going to be tremendously unpleasant for media professionals and journalists everywhere. But we disagree with the conventional wisdom that experts and sources using blogs and the tools of citizen journalism can simply replace the work of trained journalists who invest time, money, and some degree of expertise in a subject matter, because in the end, journalism is a collaborative process amongst professionals, tremendously laborious, and the comparative advantage of magazines and newspapers are people like him, who know how to write a good story and tell it elegantly in a way that commands interest and debate.
Jason, it seems to me it's a perfect example of the centralized model going to a distributed peer model, right? You're just not going to have the New York Times as your umbrella.
The only thing I would disagree with is the notion that it can't be a blogger. I mean, you will see a next generation Tom Friedman-like brand emerge as a blogger. So I think you sort of err in calling him a reporter versus a blogger.
Well, it's not a binary opposition, so it's a false choice to say we may have either one or the other. There will be millions of bloggers who will arise to continue to surprise and delight audiences, but I think there is still a place for journalists existing inside coherent businesses, even if those businesses are going to look very, very different from they have historically. Ram is signaling me desperately, saying he hates me and everyone I work with.
Well, I think the issue is, I think journalism as we know it, with fact-checking, who's going to go report the Iraq war in Iraq, not in their living room in Santa Clara? Who's going to tell us about both sides of an issue in Washington on taxes, for example, or anything else that requires deep introspective research and fact-checked reporting, I think journalism as we know it will not survive if the New York Times says it costs them $350 million a year to keep the newsroom going with the journalists and the pay and everything, and they're making $150 million in revenue from it. So there needs to be a solution. Today's solution has been, they've been lucky enough to find a billionaire with a big enough ego every year who wants to put some money into it so that they can wake up and say, I own a piece of this paper. But that's not the long-term solution. I think there needs to be a solution, whether it's micropayments, whether it's the pendulum has swung too far where the consumer expects everything to be free. Some of these things cost money, real money, to run a newsroom, and I think we owe it to ourselves as citizens to have good news, good reporting outside of, with all due respect to blogs, and there will be a Friedman in the blog world. I would still like to see fact-checked news in some form. It doesn't need to be in the print form. It can be on the web and completely only on the web, but it needs to be paid for in some form by consumers, or else the ad model alone cannot support it.
Here's the good news that I found when I was researching the millennials, this generation. By far and away, they are the largest consumers of news in history comparing to other generations, i.e., they spend about twice as much time reading news as we do. They just read it online. But they consume news, pure real news, in addition to blogs. And so they're preconditioned to keep that going. The question is, what will be the payment source that funds it?
Yeah, we're talking here about the survival of quality journalism, right?
But
I mean, whether you call it newspapers or something else.
The good news is they want it.
Yeah.
Right. Every day, 40 million people read news online. And the weekly traffic of the New York Times website is 14 million people. If we can't build a business around that, then there's something wrong with us.
Last week I spent time with my nephew who's 23, and he recently married his new wife who's 23, and they're both journalism majors. So they graduated 2 years ago, and so they're of this era. How they do their work is very different, but they see themselves as journalists. Their stories are tighter, they're tooled more rapidly. The pace at which they have to do the research and impact quality writing. They both have jobs, but how they perform their jobs as a journalist major and the tools they use. My nephew has a Blidget that he uses on the site that he writes for. His wife writes for 3 family-run magazine chains in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and so she probably writes. She writes about the same amount of time that you would have done as a journalist, but she writes a tremendous number of pieces, and she still researches them. So the pressures on a career here and sort of the compactness and velocity that they have to perform the work and the tools of how they deliver it are dramatically changed.
That's true.
Great.
Should we ask what the audience thinks before we invite Karen up to thank everyone? Do you love Tony?
Hey, this is my club, man. Come on, better.
That got them to vote the right way.
Actually, it's
lots of
about
haters.
70%.
About 70% of love.
Okay, well, at this point, you have something else to say, Joe, or no? Okay, I think this is probably the most educated session we've had, because everybody got to pick one trend rather than 2, and so they had their best one. Our crowd ones bombed for the most part, so
That's because we're smarter than the crowd in here.
Right, which is an interesting point here, but we just want to thank, we know that y'all are extremely busy.
The crowd ones were those reporters.
Yeah, with those reporters. But you're all busy, and this is a great event. As founder of the Churchill Club, I appreciate coming back every year. We hope to see you next year, and want to thank you all and bring Karen Tucker up to do the closing remarks. But let's hear it for our distinguished panel.
I guess I can just use this. Thank you very much all of you, Vinod and Steve, Ann, Ram, Joe, and of course Tony and Jason. Thank you all for coming. We do have for your collection a Churchill Club t-shirt. We hope you will wear it with fierce pride. And we'll see you all at the next meeting of the club. Good night.